Okay, first I'm going to talk to a group of seventh graders about the COVID vaccine. Okay, guys, so at this point, we understand how COVID-19 spreads and why it's important to follow these safety procedures to protect yourself and the other people around you from getting sick. And now we're going to switch gears and talk about vaccination. So I'm sure you've all been hearing a lot about the CDC lately. One other thing that they do is an epidemiology report where they publish public health news and information every week. And this is called the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, or MMWR. And in March, there were 3 reports published about the safety and effectiveness of the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine. And I know there are a lot of things that you may have heard said about vaccines, but the MMWR reports come from a trustworthy source and they're made by analyzing scientific data. So the first report basically asked the question, did the vaccine prevent COVID-19 related urgent care and emergency department visits? And basically, yes, it did. 2-dose vaccinations provided a very high level of protection against COVID-19 in teenagers, so 12 to 17-year-olds. And this was found out from the CDC doing a multi-state analysis of 39,217 emergency department and urgent care encounters. Second, did the vaccine actually prevent COVID-19 infection? And it turned out that the 2-dose vaccinations did reduce the risk of Omicron infection, which is the main variant of the virus, by 31% in 5 to 11-year-olds and by 59% in 12 to 15-year-olds. And kids and teenagers who got the vaccine and still got COVID ended up spending less time sick in bed than those who did not get vaccinated. And the third report asked, how safe were COVID-19 vaccine booster shots? The CDC found that they were safe, and mild to moderate short-term reactions to the vaccine were normal. Serious adverse effects were very rare. Okay, now this is what I'm going to wear for talking to a group of parents at the PTO meeting about the COVID vaccine. Okay, this next segment is going to be about the effectiveness and safety of the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine for children. And we're going to review the findings from 3 of the CDC's most recent Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Reports, or MMWR, which is a weekly epidemiological report for publishing public health news and information. So the first report was concerned with the effectiveness of the 2-dose vaccine in preventing COVID-19 infection among children from ages 5 to 15. The CDC analyzed data from a study that monitored infection in a cohort of 1,364 kids, and it was found that 2-dose vaccinations reduced the risk of Omicron infection by 31% in kids from age 5 to 11 and by 59% in teenagers from 12 to 15 years old. And in addition, vaccinated children who did catch COVID-19 were affected less severely, so they spent on average half a day less sick in bed than did unvaccinated children. Next is concerned with the effectiveness of the vaccine in preventing COVID-19 associated emergency department and urgent care visits among non-immunocompromised children from 5 to 17 years old. So for this study, a multi-state analysis was performed of 39,217 emergency department and urgent care encounters, and 2-dose vaccinations were shown to provide a high level of protection against COVID-19 in teenagers from ages 12 to 17. And the last report that we're going to go over is about the safety monitoring of COVID-19 booster shots among children from 12 to 17. So here, the CDC looked at reports to VSafe, which is a voluntary smartphone-based safety surveillance system, and also the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So from December 2021 to February 2022, about 2.8 million children in the US received a Pfizer booster dose. And the number of doses actually reported to these 2 systems were 3,418 and 914 respectively. And these reports were found to be very similar to those of a primary series dose. This indicates that the COVID-19 booster shots are indeed safe. So mild to moderate local and systemic reactions were normal. they were expected to occur after vaccination, and serious adverse events were very rare. And this is going to be my presentation for a group of pastors. Okay, so far we've talked about the facts of how COVID-19 is spread and the safety practices that are backed by data to be the most effective ways to prevent people from getting sick. And now we're going to talk about some recent reports from the CDC about the Pfizer COVID vaccine's effectiveness and safety, specifically for children between the ages of 5 to 17. So these are going to be three scientific articles from the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, which is a weekly epidemiological report from the CDC for publishing scientific news and health information to the public. And the first report here covers a study measuring the vaccine effectiveness in protecting youth against emergency department visits and urgent care visits. So the CDC found that 2-dose vaccinations provided a high level of protection against COVID-19 in children aged 12 to 17, and they did a multi-state analysis of 39,217 encounters and calculated vaccine effectiveness data. And among adolescents, vaccine effectiveness 14 to 149 days after the second dose was very high. So it was between 92 to 94%. And greater than 150 days after the dose, vaccine effectiveness was a bit lower. So it was recommended that all children who were eligible stay up to date with their COVID vaccinations in order to stay as safe as possible. And another study explains that, well, this report explains a study that was done on the effectiveness of the vaccine in actually preventing COVID-19 infection in children. So the CDC analyzed data from monitoring COVID infection in a cohort of more than 1,300 children between 5 to 15 years old. And 2-dose vaccinations were shown to reduce the risk of Omicron COVID-19 infection by 31% among children aged 5 to 11 and 59% among children aged 12 to 15. In addition, vaccinated children who were infected with Omicron spent on average half a day less sick in bed than did unvaccinated children. And the last report that I'm sharing with you covers the safety monitoring of COVID-19 booster doses. So this study was done by examining data submitted to 2 separate infection monitoring systems for teenagers between 12 to 17 years old. And the CDC reviewed adverse effects and health impact assessments during the week after receipt of a Pfizer booster dose to these systems. And these are called vSafe and VAERS. So they found that reports after a booster dose were similar to those described after a primary series dose. So the booster doses were deemed safe, and mild to moderate reactions were normal and pretty expected after vaccination.